All right, I'd like to have a little chat about Christianity if I can. First of all, just a side note, like if you're getting pissed off with these videos and you're annoyed that your finger needs to do a little bit more scrolling and that genuinely pisses you off, just delete me. Like I don't really care, to be honest with you. I've had messages from people in Palestine asking me to continue doing these videos, so if it bothers you, then fuck off. Because I'm genuinely enjoying myself, to be honest with you. I've spent my entire life researching something that, like, to be honest with you, had no practical application up until this point, and now for once it's finally useful, so I'm going to milk it for everything I can. Alright, so first of all, I want to make sure that you know for a damn fact that I don't have any kind of religious affiliations whatsoever. I'm an atheist. I can say with a quite considerable amount of confidence that God doesn't exist, and if he does exist, fuck you, God. What the fuck is leukemia in children all about? So, going on from that, Christianity, this whole terrorism thing, Islamic fundamentalism thing, has got every Christian in the Western world on their moral fucking pedestal, where they get to say, oh, Christianity is obviously a much more benevolent, benign religion. Fuck off. Fuck off. Honestly, seriously, if you read the book, 99.9% of people that proclaim that they are Christian have absolutely no fucking idea what's in the Bible. And when I start quoting, like, this, apparently, according to Tommy Robinson, there's 109 pernicious verses in the Quran. First of all, yes, and as I've mentioned this in other videos, so I don't want to go across it in too much detail, most of them are taken out of context. The ones that aren't taken out of context are quite definitely a product of their age, and if we want to be proportionate with our arguments and proportionate with our criticisms, then yes, of course, we need to look at the Bible, the literature in which the entire foundation of Western civilization is founded. And people, when I start quoting things from the Old Testament, lots of New Testament Christians start saying things like, oh, but that's the Jewish scripture. Not really. Like, if you want to be really specific, Jesus actually said that he wanted you to pay attention to everything in the Old Testament. I don't remember the specific chapter and verse, because I'm not really the kind of person that likes to commit chapter and verse from religious scripture that I don't follow to memory. But I know for a damn fact that Jesus Christ apparently said that he wanted you to hold true all of the things in the previous scriptures. So in other words, everything in the Old Testament, like the rape and the rules on how to beat your slaves and shit like that, that's all very much still relevant, apparently, according to Christ, someone that I genuinely believe doesn't actually exist. And again, like my previous statement, I'd say I've got reason to, I've got enough evidence to support that as well. Now, Jesus Christ, this sort of hippie-type character that was apparently dragged through the streets of Jerusalem and then crucified, he doesn't exist, as far as I'm concerned. He never even existed. Now, there's a reason for this. Now, Judea, which is the area where Christ was supposed to have existed, was an area around the Levant, which is sort of Palestine sort of area near the Sinai, sort of Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan sort of area, right? So that sort of Mediterranean region of the Middle East. First of all, there were loads of historians. In fact, the first century, people usually, when I say to people or religious people that there's not really very many decent historical accounts of Christ, they're like, whoa, it was the first century, what do you expect? Well, first of all, the first century is actually one of the best recorded periods of history of the ancient world that we have. There was loads of fucking historians that were playing a role in the region, Tacitus and people like that, for example. Not to mention that this entire area of the Middle East was under Roman control. The Romans were staggeringly good at keeping records. They set the bar. The Romans set the bar for records in the ancient world. They were fantastic at it. We have no records, no Roman records whatsoever of Jesus being executed. We have no Roman records of Jesus even existing. Pontius Pilate, for example, is someone that it was a genuine historical character. The person that was supposed to have, the person who was supposed to have condemned Christ to die. There was no mention of Christ in any of his correspondence, no messages of Christ whatsoever in any of his diaries, and considering the New Testament proclaimed Jesus Christ to have been this massive enemy of the state that he was supposed to have been, that is very, very suspicious. Now, they've looked into this quite a lot. Now, the Old Testament is very militant. I don't know if you've ever gone through it, but it's a very aggressive, it's sort of an eye for an eye sort of mentality. It's sort of like, you know, if someone does something to you, you fuck that person hard. This is all like Sodom and Gomorrah, angel rape. This is like Moses wiping out entire, like, cultures of people because they could. And, this is like God sending bears to kill kids because they made fun of someone because they were bald. This is like really insidious literature, right? Now, that is very militant. Now, with the Romans at this period in history, they weren't doing particularly well. This is a period just before the Roman Empire was about to split into two and was split off with the what became known as the Byzantine Empire, centered around Constantinople. Not a particularly stable period in Roman history, to be honest with you. And Judea was not a very passive, benign place to occupy. In fact, this is an area which is the demographic of this region is Jews. Now, Jewish scripture, so Old Testament scripture, says that if you put false idols is something that's not good, all right? So when the Romans turned up and they started putting up statues of like emperors and things like this fucks everyone off. This pissed everyone off. So there was lots of uprisings in Judea. There was loads, and it caused a real fucking headache, really massive headache for the Roman occupiers. So now then all of a sudden the New Testament comes out, which is this sort of, turn the other cheek, calm down, like it's fine, you love your neighbour and things like that, which is a complete 180 on Old Testament Christianity, which is weird. So there's a lot of evidence really to suggest that the New Testament, which is a very passive form of scripture, which they basically think was basically created politically by the Flavian dynasty of Rome, which is the dynasty after the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which is like the famous ones like Nero and Julius Caesar and Augustus and people like that. The Flavian dynasty, which is the dynasty responsible for things like the Colosseum, etc. They created the New Testament politically in order to pacify militant Judaism. In other words, they did it in order to calm everyone the fuck down, to get rid of all this really sort of pernicious, insidious scripture, in order to calm the Judeans down, in order to make things a little bit easier for them. And it wouldn't be the first scripture that had been created politically, artificially, in order to calm people down. So basically, what I'm trying to say from this is that the entire foundation of Christian, New Testament Christian theology is quite literally false. The only accounts that we've had to go on for the last few thousand years of Christ's existence are, I think, 2 or 3 different articles. A couple of them have been known to be mistranslations. One was relative to the word Christus being used, which everyone thought for fucking ages was a reference to Jesus Christ. It's actually a mistranslation from the word anointed, so that had nothing to do with Christ whatsoever. And the only other one that existed is a blatant forgery. They've known for it's been a forgery for a long time. So don't get on your high horse and start thinking that Christianity is this benign religion, because trust me, it doesn't have a very good track record for that. The Holocaust was an extension of Catholic dogma. The Inquisition went on for, 500 years and suppressed, basically everything you could possibly imagine. Puritan Europe was somewhere which banned dancing. Does that sound familiar? People that have a problem with Wahhabism, which I have absolutely no problem with people having a problem with Wahhabism, a Wahhabi interpretation of Sunnism, or Wahhabi interpretation of Islam. Christianity has exactly the same fucking track record. The Crusades between 1096 and 1272, we just was 10, 11, 12 different Crusades. We would just go to the Muslim world, and people who are like apologists for the Crusades will say things like, they went there to fight Islamic barbarism. There is no evidence for that whatsoever. I've studied this a long time. There is no evidence of Islamic barbarism whatsoever. The Pope Urban II basically just walked out into a French courtyard one day and wanted to unite the Christian world in Europe, because it was a point where everything was all fractioning and sectioning off, and he wanted to consolidate power for himself. So he went out and made up a load of fucking stories and then shouted, God wills it, and then you had 300 years of just genocidal crusades. So, the Christianity is no better. In fact, I would say arguably it's worse. When Tommy Robinson says things like, there's 109 pernicious verses in the Quran, read the Bible, read it. Open it up and actually read it. But as opposed to skipping to the good bits, start from the beginning and then work your way forward like you would do with any book. Do you know what I mean? God's sake.